So this is video number 2 on rational expressions, simplifying rational expressions. And right here we're going to go to the book. We're going to go to page 529. And in the first part of this section, they pretty much explain what we explained on the last video. They took 8/12 and rewrote it with multiplication. 2 times 4 is 8, 3 times 4 is 12. And of course, because we have multiplication on top and bottom, we're able to cancel out the 4's. So the answer is the remaining 2/3, 2/3. Okay. Same thing over here. They show a quadratic trinomial up on top, quadratic trinomial on the bottom, and of course, when the a value is 1, it's really easy to factor. You put the parentheses, and you put an x, and you think what times what is +3, that if I combine together gives me a -4. That'll give me a -3 and a -1. And on the bottom one, you also think what times what is 5, that if you add together or you combine together is -6. Well, that would be -5 times -1. And as you can see, the trinomials get factored to the binomials. This trinomial gets factored to the binomials being multiplied together. So once again, because the binomials are being multiplied together, you are able to now cancel because you now have multiplication. Over here you didn't have multiplication, you had minus and plus, but now it really is a binomial times a binomial. Same thing down here, it was a trinomial, which means you had addition and subtraction going on, but now it really is something times something. Now that we have the multiplication going on through factoring, now we could actually cancel out the same thing on top and bottom. The whole x minus 1 over x minus 1 cancels out. So what's your leftover answer? X minus 3 over x minus 5. That's what they show over here. Could you cancel out these x's? Absolutely not. Okay, why not? Because there's subtraction going on. Okay, and you can't factor further. Okay, so I guess jumping to something more fun, like example number 1 right here in the book. And by the way, numbers 13 through 18, which is going to be part of your homework on page 534, are similar to this example number 1 below. So please pay attention. I guess when you're trying to simplify rational expressions, you should always the first step would be to factor everything possible. Okay, that's step 1. It's going to always try to factor. Maybe try to pull out a GCF. Maybe it's a quadratic trinomial that you could factor with the parentheses situation. Always try to factor. So on this one, it looks like they already factored out a 5x, but still on the inside you could continue factoring. Okay, so always factor. Right here you could factor by doing the parentheses situation. Down here, this one you can't factor, but this one is a difference of 2 squares. Right? You could factor this one. It's a quadratic binomial, not a trinomial. So you could factor this top quadratic trinomial and this quadratic binomial. Anyways, that's what step 1 is going to be, to factor everything possible. The question is why? Why do you want to factor? So you could obtain multiplication. That way, after you have the multiplication, you could do step 2, which would be cancel anything alike that's on the top and bottom. I probably shouldn't have said top and bottom. I should have said numerator and denominator, but I guess you understand what I'm saying. So you want to factor first to be able to get multiplication, so you could then cancel whatever is on top and bottom, whatever's alike on top and bottom. Okay, so let's take a look at the example that they did. This quadratic trinomial, since the a value is 1, inside the parentheses, ignoring the 5x, inside the parentheses there's a 1 for the a in front of the x squared. And so that means that this trinomial, you're going to be able to write it as parentheses, x, and you think what times what is 3, that if you combine together is +4. That would be a +3 times 1. 3 times 1 is 3, and if you add 3 plus 1 together, it does give you the middle value 4. So this quadratic trinomial gets factored to this binomial times that binomial. Okay, and of course the 5x, it just comes down. Now how about the bottom one? Well, this binomial x minus 6, there's nothing to factor out. You just rewrite it. There it is, x minus 6. Now this x squared minus 9, that you could rewrite it as the parenthesis times parenthesis, and you have your x, and you're thinking what times what is -9, that if you add together is the middle term, which is nothing. Oh, that's easy. That's +3 times -3. So there's the factored form of that quadratic binomial. And once again, this is the factored form of the above quadratic trinomial. Okay? Anyhow, why did we factor? That was step one. We factored everything possible. Why do we factor? So we could get multiplication. Step two is to cancel anything that's on top and bottom that's alike. Okay? So what do we have? We have this binomial x plus 3. We have this binomial x plus 3. So we are able to cancel those out. Okay, that's what they do. That's what they show on the next step. I don't really agree with the way, well, I guess either way. You could do it the way the book does. The book rewrites the x plus 3's out here on the side, and they rewrite everything else, and they cancel that out. You could do that if you want. In my opinion, it's just quicker to just, oh, there's an x plus 3 up here and x plus 3 down there. Go ahead and cancel them out. And then you take what's left over and you rewrite it, because there's nothing else. The x plus 1 up here, there is no x plus 1 down here. The 5x, there is no 5x. And of course, you can't individually cancel out this x with that x. You can't do that because there's plus and there's minus. It has to be multiplication, right? So there's your final answer, rewriting the 5x right there, the x plus 1 right there, the x minus 6, and the x minus 3. So that was the example done in the book, and they give us a couple of more examples down here. Oh yeah, by the way, on your answer, some books or some teachers like you to write down the extra information of what x cannot be. Okay, so we have the right answer, but just for kicks, let's list what the x value cannot be. In other words, what x value would mess up this answer? Well, obviously, if x were 6, that would be 6 take away 6, that's 0. That would give you a 0 here, and 0 times anything is still 0, and 0 in the denominator of a fraction would make it undefined. So we also want to say x cannot be 6, or x cannot be 3, because 3 would make that a 0 also. So in addition to getting your final answer, I'm not sure if I'm going to ask for this on the quiz, but let's just understand it. In addition to giving your final answer, you also want to say, but your x can't be 6 and your x can't be 3. Okay? Because if it were 6 or 3, the whole fraction becomes undefined, which would mess up the whole thing. Okay, so there's this like extra detail to your answer. Okay, so how do we do that? Again, take your factored form, set your whole denominator if you want. Set the whole denominator equal to 0. And if you did have x minus 6 times x minus 3 equal to 0, you would use the zero product property to separate them and solve. So you'd have x minus 6 equals 0, x minus 3 equals 0, and then you'd be able to solve each and find the values that would mess up your fraction, which is obviously 6 and negative and positive 3. Okay, so you say that x cannot be 6, x cannot be 3. Let's do example 1a at the bottom of the page. Step 1 is to factor everything possible. So this is already factored up here. But down here you have a quadratic trinomial that could be rewritten as this. Okay, so because the a value is 1, I rewrote the parenthesis, the y. I brought down this y. Now I'm going to think, what times what is negative 6 that if I combine together is negative 1? There's a negative 1 right here in front of the y. So what would that be? That would be a negative 3 times a positive 2. That'll give you negative 6. And if you combine those together, it really does give you a negative 1. So that's your factored form. So I just did it right below. So I'm just going to put a line through it and pretend that this is what I have in the denominator. So now let me look at the top and let me look at the bottom and cancel out anything that is alike on top and bottom. Well, I have this y minus 3 up here that I could cancel out with the y minus 3 down there. Obviously I can't do the y plus 4 and the y plus 2. I can't even cancel out this y with that y because of the addition. And over here I have a 4y and a y. Could I cancel out this y with this y? Absolutely. Why? Because this is saying 4 times y, and this is just a y. There is no addition or subtraction involved. So I could cancel out this y with that y. So my final answer will be what's left over, which would be the 4 that's left over, the y plus 4, and the y plus 2. So that's your answer right there. And of course you also want to say, but y cannot be, what can it be? It can't be negative 2, because if it were negative 2, then negative 2 plus 2 is 0, and that would mess up the whole fraction. So y cannot be negative 2. That's your caveat. That's your extra detail about this answer. Okay? Let's jump to actual homework problem. I am going to want you to do numbers 13 through 18 from page 534 in the book. So let's jump to number 15 from 534. There it is. And again, I'm going to go through. Step one is to factor everything possible. So this, you could factor x squared minus 9. Let me start by drawing out this huge division bar. And the x squared minus 9, I'm going to do it right here. It's going to be a binomial times a binomial. So the question is, what times what is negative 9 that if I combine together gives me the middle value, which is nothing? That's easy. That's going to be a positive 3 and a negative 3. Okay. Now this also x squared minus z squared, even though it looks complicated because there's a z squared, there's two variables instead of a number. It's done the same exact way. So let me set it up. And the only other difference is that instead of a 9 we have a z squared. So what times what is z squared? Actually negative z squared, that if I combine together gives me nothing because there is no middle value. That's easy. It's going to be a plus z and a minus z, plus z and a minus z. Okay, so that's factored. And on the bottom there's really nothing to factor. There's a 4, there's a x plus z, and a x minus 3. So let me just rewrite it on the bottom. There it is. Okay, so now that we have factored everything possible, now we have a bunch of multiplication, right? Something times something times something times something over something times something times something. Now we could cancel out anything that's alike on top and bottom. So obviously on the top we have a x minus 3, and on the bottom we have an x minus 3. On the top we have a x plus z, and on the bottom we have a x plus z. Okay, so there is no 4 up on top, so we're just going to rewrite this thing, and that's our final answer. There it is, x plus 3 times x minus z over 4. Now if I asked you, is there any values for x that would mess this fraction up, that would make it undefined? The answer is no. So you don't have to say, but x can't be negative 3 or something like that, because there's no way you're going to end up with 0 in the denominator. So this is your only answer. You don't have to say anything else about it. You're done. I hope this helps, and please do that section of the homework, numbers 13 through 18 from page 534. Okay?